Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. As we are coming into this, I am so thrilled to be presenting a timely program brought to you by the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice entitled Building Successful Partnerships to Advance Your Cause. This panel is part of CRSJ's latest initiative, the Civil Rights Lawyer Bootcamp, which is a 2-day virtual summit that serves as a comprehensive resource for young lawyers, law students, public service attorneys, and advocates of all backgrounds. We certainly hope that you will stay with us throughout the day as we have an amazing lineup. I am very excited about this panel of also lawyers and advocates because we're going to be diving into a couple of areas that I think are most critically important in terms of collaboration, partnership, and making sure everyone's voice is heard. During today's program, we encourage you to ask questions of our panelists through the Q&A feature. Again, that is through the Q&A feature, not the chat function. If you do not see the controls, please ensure your screen is not idle. We will be monitoring the Q&A and will do our very best to address your questions, time permitting. We will share the recording of this program with everyone who has registered, so please share it widely with your network. We also have several resources and more to come regarding this panel. I am so pleased that I have some all-star guests with us today. Rubina Mostafa, Senior Staff Attorney, Detroit Justice Center, LaRon Baker, Legal Director of the ACLU of Washington, Harriet Targan, Director of Advocacy and Policy, the Mississippi Center for Justice. And I am Lacey Durham, who will serve as your moderator. I'm currently the chair of the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, and it is indeed my pleasure to be here with you today. As way of background, civil rights are guarantees of equal social opportunities and equal protection under the law, regardless of race, religion, or other personal characteristics. Now, we have long known that civil rights is not just about litigation. It is policy in the legislative realm, advocacy, and so much more that often starts at a grassroots efforts. The purpose is to effectuate change on the ground, and collaboration is a key component of that. So collaboration is our jam. We love to see collaboration at all levels. And particularly working with lay people and everyday advocates who aren't lawyers or have legal training is critically important to advancing civil rights and social justice. It's important for us to note that we are not in isolation and we need each other to lean in to get to our desired goal. So this program is for everyone, law students, young lawyers, seasoned lawyers, retired judges, lay people, and much more. So we're going to get started with our panelists. What I would like to do is I will start with Rubina. I would love for you to share with us how building successful partnerships looks like in your particular area of work.
Thank you, Lacey. Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I'm going to start my PowerPoint here. Give me 1 second. Yes, as Lacey mentioned, I'm Rubina Mustafa, a senior staff attorney with the Detroit Justice Center, and I've had the honor for the past 4 years of working with the Department of State and other stakeholders to address driver's license issues. So I'm happy to talk to you today about our systems-based approach to improving mobility and economic opportunity. Just to understand the problem, though, to lay out the picture, we work on, my specialty is working with people who are trying to restore their driver's license based on factors such as poverty or other circumstances that have devastated their ability to have valid driving privileges. To understand the scope, there's more than 7 million Americans that had lost their driver's licenses for non-payment of a ticket or fine. Many of those individuals are low income, working poor on public benefits, simply can't afford it. And this is a devastating problem that directly impacts families, whether it's from traffic tickets or criminal court or juvenile court or even local courts. And the Fines and Fees Justice Center, as well as the Wilson Center for Science and Justice at Duke Law issued an amazing report called Debt Sentence, which is very eye-opening. It was a national survey they conducted to illustrate some of the things of what families are dealing with. And the statistic of 1 in 3 Americans are struggling with this shows what a devastating problem it is. In Michigan, in 2020, the legislature passed, at least as to court debt-based license suspensions, they did pass a comprehensive reform law. It used to be that every missed payment or even a missed court date would lead to a license suspension, an indefinite license suspension. That meant the license suspension could not be removed from a person's record until they dealt with the court or paid them in full. And again, if you're poor and you can't afford to pay, you had this forever problem. And also, the suspensions would stack on top of each other. So if you got a suspension in one court and you drove out of necessity and got another ticket, they just continued on and on and on. So this was an incredibly groundbreaking reform that allowed for not only removing the sanction going forward of suspending licenses based on non-appearance or non-payment, but it was also retroactively removing the sanctions that had been previously imposed. We believe that about 150,000 Michiganders were either able to get their license or very close to being able to apply for driving privileges, but the actual number of records that were actually updated because of it was probably around 350,000. So what is the collaboration that was key to this reform? Not only I'm talking post the legislative change, it was really important that people understood this change. There's a lot of reforms that happen with good intentions, but many people aren't able to take advantage of them. So my organization, the Detroit Justice Center, as well as the Department of State, a United Way organization, a DTE Energy, which is our utility company, which is a big employer, as well as other legal aid organizations, and a great pro bono counsel from one of our big firms here, Miller Canfield, saw this vision of bringing the government to the people, that people really needed that one-on-one interaction to understand. Now, our original pilot was simply to help people understand the reform laws so that they had, accurate information. There was like a mobile branch, which we literally have the Department of State computers for people to get records and do any business. And of course, pro bono attorneys who provided critical guidance to understand what to expect and how to restore their license. But what we found was there were so many issues and so many layers, and it was really important for that individual walking out of one of the clinics to really understand what was going on. But I really want to highlight some of the individuals and the stakeholders that really made this possible. So DT Energy is our utility company, one of the large utility companies here in Michigan, and they actually came to the Department of State because we had problems with their grid, which I know people are familiar with when the power goes out. And one of the issues, we have a lot of trees here in Michigan and they get in the way of the power lines. And so the utility company was like, we can't get enough people who are licensed to work for us. What can we do about this, Department of State? They weren't aware of the problem at all. And so they, said, we'll work on a program with you. We need personnel to help us solve this grid problem. And the Department of State was led by Keela Crane, who you may have met. She's the deputy legal director here in Michigan, and she really is a fierce leader and has brilliant ideas. So glad to be working with her. But like I said, there were also United Way programs. The Attorney General's office has contributed. Pro bono counsel, legal aid associations. We all came together and said, how can we directly service people? So my main area in the clinics is the volunteer attorney piece, is making sure that people are getting accurate information, but also that we have enough volunteer attorneys to meet the need of providing that legal advice and training them. So we did originally work with an organization called Lakeshore Legal Aid. They have their own events and they do really wonderful work, but they couldn't continue with the team, but I continued with the team. And we have been really very, very fortunate that so many attorneys that have various practice areas have come, gotten the training, and really understood how this is a need. And every one of the volunteers say, oh my gosh, let me do this again. This is such a huge need in this community for, I think not just Michigan, but anywhere people don't have the ability to have transportation, either to work, for healthcare, for education. It is a complete barrier to any opportunity to succeed in life. So everyone really bought into this. And so what's nice also in Michigan is we have the State Bar of Michigan provide malpractice insurance for free for any attorneys that are representing people pro bono. And it's very easy for people to sign up. It's literally a form. The state covers all pro bono work. So even those who are in private practice or want to do something on the side have that coverage, and it doesn't impact their firm's expenses. So what is this clinic? We call it the Road to Restoration Clinic, and how do these different entities interact? I do apologize for the smallness on my screen, but essentially it's a journey, and we wanted to create a flow for attendees so that they knew, first of all, they were in a safe place. They could come to the clinic and find out answers to their problem. It wasn't going to be like walking into any other government office and being pushed around to different people and nobody had answers. We wanted to make sure that people had answers. So the first part of their journey is meeting with the Department of State. In Michigan, the driving records are private, so they have to either get the driving record themselves. They can download it from the internet through a login as well, but usually people get it at the clinic. And the Department of State, we call it triage, because they really actually go over this document. It's not easy to read, it's not intuitive, and really help them understand what's going on in their situation and what are their barriers to license restoration. And then if there are questions for them about what next steps are, like how do I file this paperwork? How do I go to court if I need to address the court? That's when they come to the volunteer attorneys. The program has expanded in our second full year, and somewhat in our first full year. There have been courts that have been very eager to work with us because it lightens their burden too. It closes a bunch of their open cases. And some of the courts have been wonderful in terms of having people who come to the clinic, giving them fee waivers, helping them at the clinic, as well as even addressing warrants. I was a little pushy in that area. I'm like, people are afraid to go to court. If they could take care of their warrants here at the clinic and just get a court date, that would be so much better for them than having for us to tell them to go to the court. People are afraid to go to courts. They're afraid to go to the police station. They're afraid to go to the government. We really need to make this a comfortable space. So the courts have really stepped up, especially in Detroit. And some others in Kalamazoo and other cities. The United Way of Southeast Michigan has stepped up in a huge way. Like I said, this was all about court-based debt. And so for the United Way and some other organizations, and even ARPA funds were used by the city of Lansing. There were creative ways to help people who are financially devastated get over this barrier. And then, of course, no question, DTE, the employer, they would often have resource tables, but other community partners had resource tables there if people were looking for a job or work training. So we have, I probably went over this a little bit, but I did want to point out the success that the city of Lansing, the mayor, designated a huge grant based on ARPA funds to just help his city's residents get over court-based debt. And we had a lot of success at that clinic of people getting their license back. But also, like I said, community unions volunteered to really help out their members and host events and fundraise for their members also. So there was really the whole community coming together because we all are unified in trying to see that people succeed. And then, you know, the important part of the one-on-one consultation. In fact, when the clinics had been up and going, one of my colleagues at my organization asked me, so does everybody get an individual consultation? I said, it is essential. It is essential. Everybody who comes to the clinic gets one-on-one for their situation, what's for them to get their questions answered. And also there are some administrative hearing processes where it's an application and there's multiple steps people have to do. And a lot of people are intimidated from making a phone call or going and asking the government, like, how do I do your process? We try to make it very accessible so that when they are going through the process, they even know after leaving our clinic, not only the steps, but who to contact if they do have a question and what questions they can ask. So we even give them a script. And we do know, although we don't have all the year statistics yet, but we were able to discover that about 120 in our first full year were able to restore their licenses from that first year. So, what have the statistics now? There have been 62 clinics since their inception. We've had some smaller events, so my number might be a little different from the Secretary of State's, but 62 events. Over 10,000 citizens have been helped by the clinics and even outreach after the clinics. Like I said, they're deep listening, safe space sessions. And not only me as an advocate in the community, but we all join together as a team to advocate for further reforms and are talking about them outside of the clinics. One of those huge successes was the law that is going to be effective or not effective as April 1st. It was a repeal of a very repressive law that was keeping people who had addressed all their open sanctions from applying for several years. And it was just because of this one sentence in the statute, which is no longer going to be a barrier for people on April 1st. So that was a huge success because we showed them from the clinics this is an ongoing issue. The other success that started last year, and we're so happy to continue this year, is that, and this is, I have to say, give credit to Keela Crane, who really showed leadership on working with Department of Corrections here. So many people leave correctional facilities and are paroled with no ID, no nothing. She took leadership to make sure that that was not something that would be a hindrance for people who are returning citizens. And we've restored almost 100 licenses through this project. And I say we because it's really the Secretary of State, but we do a very more deep dive consultation because these are, when we consult with the individuals, the residents in the correctional facilities, they're not able to make phone calls or go to courts. So we do a little bit more for them where we can. And at least if they're not able to restore their license while incarcerated, at least they know the steps to do when they'll be out soon. So that's been very exciting. So this is the other piece of it is the communications teams from our respective organizations, especially DTE and the Secretary of State's office. They put a lot of assets together, this being one of them, about how we've worked all over the state, holding multiple clinics, training over 125 attorneys, and helping thousands of people. I love this infographic because it shows that everything is interconnected and has led to the success. Again, I know I'm probably running out of time, but the communications teams have been amazing. They broaden the stories. They, tell the story that when we, I believe there's that phrase that when the water rises, all the boats rise. So when we work together and collaborate, we see better success than without it. And the fact that the courts and sort of usually the adversarial parts are joining us, they realize that they will benefit because they're able to close cases. And even if they didn't collect the hundreds of dollars they wanted in the first place, at least collecting something or closing out a case gets things off their docket. So they've been really great to cooperate with. Thank you so much for listening to my talk, and I look forward to answering any questions. Thank you.
Robina, thank you so much for that. That was absolutely brilliant. I must admit, I am smitten by this collaboration. There's nothing more exciting to me. And I always say we have to learn to meet people where they are And that's exactly what you've done here. The cross-pollination, the partnership at every level, the government, lawyers, non-lawyers, stakeholders, private companies, public companies, is just absolutely amazing. And I am going to selfishly reach out to you to figure out how I can steal this model and see if we can implement it in other places. This is exactly what this session is about. I think this session could be a masterclass. I know we have some more speakers. Laurent, I'm going to go to you next. Tell me what you're doing and give us how you collaborate effectively across the board.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Lauren Baker. I'm the legal director of the ACLU of Washington. I've been the legal director for about 2.5 years. My background is I started my career actually as an ACLU attorney. I was a staff attorney here at the ACLU of Washington for 6 years. And then I went to the Washington State Attorney General's Office, their Civil Rights Division, during the first Trump administration. And then went to public defense. I wasn't a public defender, but I ended up in the leadership of public defense, bringing lawsuits and developing an amicus practice before the Washington State Supreme Court for people who are involved in the criminal legal system, and then came back to the ACLU of Washington.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
So, here at the ACLU of Washington, we approach the work through an integrated advocacy model. And what that means is that we use all of the tools that we can possibly have to fix problems. The ACLU historically was a litigation-focused heavy entity. And eventually, at least the ACLU of Washington learned that litigation doesn't fix all problems. You can bring a successful lawsuit and it doesn't mean anything if the community didn't want it, and or if the community isn't educated about it, or doesn't develop an interest in it. And so here at the ACLU of Washington, we do our advocacy through legislative law work, through communications, public education, through community organizing, and through litigation. And the way in which we think about approaching the work is we identify a problem. And the way that we tend to identify the problems that we want to advocate for is by looking to communities who've been historically marginalized and having them tell us what it is they need fixed or what it is that they want to be advocated for, or what their dream is, what their dream outcome is. And we use that as a way to guide our work, way to guide our program planning, our strategic planning, a way to guide what matters we jump into and when we jump into them. So we're very community-led. We're not entirely community-led. That would be, I can't say that, but we try to be primarily community-led. So that's sort of the way our integrated advocacy works. We work on a wide range of issues, from free speech to criminal legal reform to protecting the rights of our trans community members to equal protection and to voting rights, which is what I'm going to talk about. So our voting rights work is it's not, I wouldn't say a substantial part of our work, but it is a big part of our work. And primarily we focused on the east side of the state of Washington. So in Washington, the west side is, Seattle, and it's rainy and, it's like twilight. The east side of the state is much more rural. It's very conservative. And it also has a very different demographic makeup. It has a large Latinx community because there's a lot of farm work happens in that area, which is what built and developed this large Latinx community. But there also is a really significant power differential between the white and Latinx community, and really significant issues of racial discrimination and issues around power within the eastern side of the state. So Yakima Valley is one of the largest areas in the east side of the state, and it's primarily Latinx, but those who are in elected positions in most of that area are white. And there are really significant differences between the interests of the Latinx community and the white community. And you can see that based off of electoral outcomes, like who gets elected, who is a Latinx preferred candidate, who's a white preferred candidate. The white preferred candidate almost always wins in most elections on the East Side. Same as white preferred issue versus the Latinx preferred issue. And so for the last 10 years, the ACLU of Washington has brought various lawsuits to change the elected structures so that the Latinx community can have people in positions of authority who are making decisions about municipal budget allocations, who are making decisions about school board, being able to have people in positions of authority that actually align with the Latinx community. And so recently we brought a lawsuit against the Sunnyside School Board. Sunnyside is a small, very rural town. It is majority Latinx. However, the way in which they elected their city council and school board members were all at large. And because a large percentage of the Latinx community are not of the age of majority, they can't vote. The white population almost always just like took over, right? Because it was majority vote gets the elected officials, gets the outcome. And so it was impossible for Latinx communities to elect candidates of their choice to city council and the school board. And the Latinx community in Sunnyside and in that region, really came together 3 years ago to try to change this. A group called ELLA, Empowering Latino Leadership Association, got candidates, Latinx candidates to run or Latinx preferred candidates to run, did a lot of voter education, a lot of get out the vote, and really put a significant amount of energy into electing Latinx candidates to both the city council and the school board. And they really rallied the whole community, which of course brought out some really hateful reactions to that. There were parts of the white community that really didn't like seeing the Latinx community organize, try to take control. And so there were some really vitriolic, racist responses to that. The outcome of that election was the city council actually elected 3 Latinx individuals to the city council, and which was a great outcome, especially considering it was an at-large election, right? So the Latinx community was able to get the vote out and also sway white voters. The ELLA ran 2 candidates for the school board. And the school board, when I first heard about the school board election, I was like, what? Like, who cares about school boards? But it turns out in Sunnyside, the school board is a really powerful entity. And the Sunnyside School District was really engaged in a lot of discriminatory practices against Latinx students. Both in over-disciplining Latinx students, in not funding Latinx history studies, and in overfunding sports, but not any of the other groups that the Latinx community actually wanted their kids to engage in. And kids were dropping out of school. It had really significant impacts. And so ELLA ran 2 candidates for the Sunnyside School Board, but they didn't win. And in part, it was an electoral structural issue, which is the Sunnyside School District included voters not just in Sunnyside, but in the rural area around it, which is majority white. And so in this all at-large election system, the white majority was able to elect their candidates, which meant that the 2 Latinx candidates who were sponsored by this community group, ELLA, were not able to get in. And so ELLA actually reached out to the ACLU of Washington because they realized that there was a structural issue, that the at-large election system was actually a barrier for Latino communities to elect candidates of their choice to the school board. And we looked at it, and we have, there's a Washington State Voting Rights Act, which is an analog to the Federal Voting Rights Act. It's a little bit more protective, actually. We did, ran numbers, like looked at the statistics of how people voted and determined that if there were districts, if people voted by districts, the Latinx community could actually elect multiple candidates of their choice to the school board. But they couldn't do it if it was at large. And so we got together with AYA and did a deep dive into the history of discrimination in Sunnyside, which required us to meet with people who've been there for generations, to do research, and to really work with AYA and the community to get their story before the court. And so we ended up not only doing a statistical analysis of elections, but creating a historical writing up the history of Latinx in Sunnyside, which included a history of voting discrimination. There was a time where the auditor in the Yakima area, in Sunnyside area, actually required Latinos to do reading literacy tests. I know, it's shocking. And just a number of other instances of discrimination in elections in Sunnyside. Ultimately, we sent Sunnyside a notice that included all of the community's history. And they decided to, well, it took them a while, it was not immediate, to settle and to change their election system. And so now the next election cycle comes up in November, and we believe that the Latinx community will be able to elect at least 3 candidates to the school board. And to celebrate and to educate the community, we actually held a large community gathering in Sunnyside to, one, celebrate the victory, the community's victory, right? Because AYA and the community had come together to try to make this change. And we helped do the like structural change to make it happen. But also to educate the community and to get people excited about voting. And so that is one of the more recent collaborations that we've had. And because of that work that we did with AYA and in Sunnyside, we actually are still connected and collaborating with folks there. And so Sunnyside, with the new Trump administration and the threats of, really intense immigration enforcement, we've been able to stay connected with that community, do know your rights trainings for both community members and for people who are working with community members. So train the trainers and also training community members on what their rights are, what they can do, and what maybe they shouldn't do to keep themselves safe. And which has allowed us to stay in connection with them when issues come up, we're able to respond accordingly. So that's an example of the work that we do here at the ACLU of Washington.
LaRon, thank you so much for sharing. Again, we can see how collaboration actually yields real-time impacts in effects. I am smitten. I hope that the audience is paying attention to the resources that are there. You're leaning into how these collaborations work and truly the impact that they can have here. We have another esteemed panelist that I am going to kick it over to. I say we're batting on 1,000 here. And so, Arya, I turn it over to you to share about what you've been doing in your organization and how you've been collaborating accordingly.
Great. Thank you so much. And hello, everybody. My name is Haria Tarakin, and I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Mississippi Center for Justice. We're a social, racial, and economic justice law firm. We work all across the state of Mississippi, and we work on several different things from heirs property, health, economic justice, impact litigation, housing, and education. And so collaboration looks very different for us in a lot of different ways, and collaboration is incredibly important to us. As the biggest public interest law firm and the only public interest law firm that's statewide, we are very aware all the time of how we show up. Trust is the number one thing that is important in collaboration. If you don't have trust with community, if you're not working with community all the time, you can't do your work, right? Like what is the use of a legal clinic if nobody attends? And so I think the number one thing that is important for us in our collaboration is trust. And that's trust all the way from the direct services we provide to pulling out policy issues that we're then going to advocate for at the legislative level. Living in a very red state with a very Republican supermajority, it is important that we're setting expectations all the way through with community members and with our clients, because what we can do, whether it's in the legislature, whether it's in courts, is limited by the environment that we live in. And so a lot of our trust is dependent on constantly showing up, getting rid of our legal jargon, and explaining our role often in terms of sometimes we need to show up as an attorney and sometimes we just need to show up as a community member. We are very cognizant of the fact that even though we are constantly underfunded, we are better funded than a lot of our community organizations. And so we show up with a difference in funding. We show up with a difference in education level that might lead to difficulty in explaining certain things. Again, back to the jargon, a lot of attorneys are talking about things without starting at point A or even explaining that we're now talking about, specific courts. And finally, different levels of confidentiality. We're asked all the time by community members to do certain things, to show up in certain ways, to collect certain information. And we constantly have to reset that when we're talking about confidentiality, it's not only that we're going to keep it in a small group, but actually that we're going to keep it, that sometimes we can't share it with the own community organization that brought in the client, right? And setting those expectations up front is what ensures that we can keep that trust. And so because we work on so many different things, collaboration can look so different for us. And I want to talk about two very different examples of collaboration that we have gone through in the last 3 years, one of which is an impact litigation case, which we pull our impact litigation through cases, either through direct services and issues that we see in the direct service that we provide, or systemic issues that we recognize and that are brought to us by community. And so a couple of years ago, a lot of Black farm workers in the Mississippi Delta were coming to our offices to complain that white South African workers were being brought in by white farm owners to the Mississippi Delta to work on the farms. White South Africans who were coming in on an H-2A visa were working the Mississippi farms, were being trained by Black farm workers, but were often earning more, living in better housing. We heard stories where the white South Africans were allowed to use the bathrooms inside and the Black farm workers had to use outhouses outside. And I'm talking about 2023, right? And so just like drastic, horrific conditions cases, but also a huge loss of wages, right? Black farm workers were making a third to less than a half of what the white South Africans were making. All of the legal protections afforded to the white South Africans because they were coming in on this federal visa and that had a level of scrutiny were not afforded to the same Black farm workers. Add that to an environment of constant racism in a country, state, city, area that has not dealt with the history of enslavement of Black people. And it was a really terrible situation. And so individuals who came to the Mississippi Center for Justice, though, came to us because we have had an office in Indianola in the Mississippi Delta for several years. And even during COVID, when everybody was shutting down, we found it important to keep our office open in the Mississippi Delta because a lot of individuals down there do not have access to broadband, are not as tech connected. And so while it was easy for a lot of people to stay home, to become virtual during COVID, that was not true for a lot of communities, low resource communities, low wealth communities. And so when the farm workers came to us, we realized that we had to do something. Obviously, there's a case to take on, right? And we can sue the farm owners in these cases for wage discrimination. But it was obvious that there was also a systemic problem and a holistic problem. And we needed to look at how to build trust to make sure that other farm workers came forward about other farms in the area And this is incredibly difficult because a lot of the farm owners in the Mississippi Delta also own a lot of the other things. So if a farm worker comes forward, they might not only just be jeopardizing their job, but the job of their family member that works at the car dealership or the restaurant that's owned by the same family. We held a lot of community meetings, but we also had a fellow at the time whose task it was to show up almost every day at these clients' homes. Not necessarily to talk about their cases, but to check in, right? To build the trust, to show that we are attorneys that are there. We might be your attorney, but we also want to make sure that you're okay that day, that you made it to your doctor's appointment. Maybe we were driving you to your doctor's appointment because that's what you need on that day. And then we were successful in 4 different cases. And at some point when I'm not speaking, I can drop in a link to a New York Times article that was written about our clients and about our work in this matter. But we won quite a substantial amount of money for our clients in these cases. And then we had to think about what now, right? And some of that was for our clients themselves, this was the largest amount of money that they have ever seen in their lifetime. And so, you know, an attorney can stop there, but part of the work that we do, we think of, and how we think of our clients as holistic, right? The client is not the issue they're coming to you for, but the whole human. Is that through our economic justice campaign, we have a lot of great partnerships with banks. And so we were able to connect our clients in the case with banks to make sure that they had a financial plan, that they went through financial literacy classes, that they were able to figure out how to save the money, spend the money. We also we have an heirs property campaign that will do simple wills and estate planning for individuals. So we offered them wills and estate planning to ensure that their money would be protected, that their families would be protected. And then we started working systemically with the Mississippi Wage and Hour Division, and they actually ended up doing raids of farms in the Mississippi Delta to investigate other labor violations. And then for the first time ever, the Secretary of Labor visited Mississippi and came down, and we hosted him in Indianola and talked to the head of the Department of Labor, including individuals that were responsible for the H-2A visas. And we asked questions about how is it possible when the Mississippi Delta has an unemployment rate that it does have, that the federal government is granting these farm owners H-2A visa allotments to bring white South Africans into the Mississippi Delta. And so we have an ongoing relationship with the Department of Labor. We work all the time with the Wage and Hour Division. But to me, most importantly, we have such a good relationship with our clients who we still keep in touch with that we just got a call about a new farm worker case that we're going to take on. And so collaboration really means showing up all the time. And I think attorneys are in a unique situation because a lot of times people are coming to us at the worst moment in their lives. And there is something urgent that they need help with. And lawyers, civil rights attorneys particularly, are so overwhelmed that it's easy to help with the emergency and then leave. But we really try to do in our work, really try to do our work in a way where we're constantly there and we're constantly available. And again, that might be in our capacity as an attorney, and that might be in our capacity as an advocate, but it might also be in our capacity as a community member, a friend, another face to the fight. And so the second example that I'll talk about that looks different and had different partners of collaboration was 2 years ago, a state legislator who is not from Jackson introduced a bill that was kind of a state takeover bill of Jackson. And so it was expanding state police over the city of Jackson that would report directly to the governor through the Department of Public Safety. It would have concurrent jurisdiction with Jackson Police Department, but be entirely white-led. And they were also creating a separate and apart court system to hear cases that Capitol Police took instead of Jackson Police Department. And so we worked in a huge coalition called Jackson Undivided with partners that worked on everything. Civil rights attorneys, healthcare workers, business partners. And we pulled in everybody to say, everybody who lives in and around Jackson has an interest in making sure that the people who are policing us and the judges who are judging us are elected by us, look like us, or have a structure that is impacted by the people who live here. And it was a hard fight. And for a 501c3 that is limited in the amount of lobbying that we can do, we really had to lean on other partners that were able to talk to and educate people in the legislature that were voting for something that was often against their interest, or voting for something that they didn't understand for, or making trades that were harmful to their own constituents. After we lost and HB 1020 passed, we then sued. And so we collaborated with the MacArthur Center for Justice, the MacArthur Justice Center, and tried the case in court. And we won some parts and lost some parts. But one of the great things we did was they were going to appoint judges to Jackson. And we did not get any appointed judges. But the CCID court, the Capital Complex Court, was created. And it is a temporary court with appointed municipal judges. And so then we had to think about, what does a win look like? And collaboration also means thinking about what a win is for you, what a win is for those you are collaborating with, and has that win shifted. So our first win would have been killing HB 1020. Once it passed, it was restricting it in the courts or killing it in the courts. And once we won some and lost some in the courts, it was, how do we make the CCID court treat people with dignity and be a court where people are actually getting justice, right? And so now we've been working with the Judicial College, with the appointed judges, the judges that were appointed by the same people that we were saying shouldn't have the right to appoint judges, with the public defenders, with the prosecutors, to ensure that CCID court is actually well-functioning and maybe can be a pilot court and a sample court for the rest of the state, to show that if you fully fund a court, if you have public defenders at initial appearances, that justice can look different, right? And so our win completely changed to what a win looks like changed from a court that we were trying to prevent from being created to now we're invested in the court working, not so that it can stay forever, but that we can show when you fully fund something, when you have a paperless system, when you fully fund public defenders, justice looks different. And maybe this is something that we can implement elsewhere when this court goes away. And that really was one where we had to also work outside of the work that we regularly do. We had to have partners that we don't generally partner with, but it was important for us to make sure that sometimes we're not the best advocates for something, right? If the Mississippi Center for Justice shows up, everybody knows what we're there to talk about, what we're there to do. We might not be the right messengers sometimes. And so we have a good relationship with one prosecutor, and maybe he's the messenger to fight for parity and funding for the public defender, right? The message is very different when a prosecutor says, my job will be done better if there is also a fully funded public defender. That message is very different from a civil rights organization saying, hey, we need public defenders. Hey, we need public defenders. And so collaboration is also making sure you understand your place. Are you the best messenger? Are you trusted? And what is the difference between your message? What is the difference between your voice and the voice of the people that you're trying to uplift? So that's really how we think about our work. That's really how we focus. And we make sure that we're doing direct services and the policy work, so that the policy work's not coming from the practitioners, but it's actually being pulled out of our community work.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I continue to be amazed. And I think, Hari, you actually may have touched on a little bit about a question that was raised to us. And it's really around the legal strategy to build coalition. One of the questions that came in was around some legislation that is percolating in New York City that would essentially disenfranchise and move many of the county and towns elections to odd number years, to even number years. And I think historically, as the person has put forth, it has been blamed by leadership on lack of voter turnout. But there may be some intentional, skirting of the issues there, and navigating to position other people in power, and so that the crux of things moves away from everyday citizens to a group of people. And I think you gave us a masterclass on how to do that. But I'll ask just one follow-up question in terms of that. It sounded like messaging was the critical component of bringing in the collaborators. What can you share with the audience around how do you, first of all, at what point do you know that you need different messaging? Because I think sometimes we wait too late. And then how do you come together to figure out what that messaging should be?
Great. I think for HB 1020, that was a very tricky question because Mississippi has a part-time legislature, and so things are moving fast. January to March, every day something is happening, things are changing. And so you need to figure out who am I messaging to and who are the people that I need in this coalition, right? You have the people that you work with all the time who are always going to be in the room. And part of it is who is missing and how do we bring them in right now? We very quickly knew that we had to bring in business owners because a lot of the justification from the legislature for this second police force was things aren't safe. Businesses can't thrive without safety, et cetera. But to the businesses, we were saying, if the people coming to your businesses feel like they are going to be doubly policed, they likely will not frequent businesses in Jackson, right? And they might go to the neighboring areas. But as soon as we were able to get a business owner on board, we turned messaging over to him. I think oftentimes as attorneys, we want to control everything, and we need to let some of that go. A business owner knows exactly what his concerns are and what his partner's concerns are. We might not, and even if we do, we might not know how to say it. So we really leaned on, after we were able to identify people that wanted to join the coalition, we said, hey, tell us how the messaging should look for business owners, and we will create the collateral. Tell us how the messaging should look for faith leaders, and we'll create the collateral. And part of that was, we're attorneys. We don't know how to create collateral, but we have time and resources that others don't. And so even if it's not going to look great, like, we'll do it. And even if our comms team doesn't have capacity to do it right now, because they're working on 10,000 other things that are also urgent, like, we can create a one-pager that community members might not have the opportunity to do. So I think it's finding a messenger that is trusted and helping amplify them. And then I think some of it is, and I am a rare one, and you will rarely hear me say working across the aisle, right? I think we've been there for a very long time. The aisle is getting wider and wider and wider. And sometimes working across the aisle is not the best use of your time. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And so I think part of that is also understanding, hey, there are people that are never going to hear this message. And if we spend too much time there, we're going to lose so much of our momentum that we just need to let some people go, right? Some people are never going to be on our side. That's okay for right now. Or maybe there's another time to deal with them. But as long as the legislature is in session, we need to figure out who our legislators are that we can target right now. They're going to be the people who are going to vote against us no matter what. And so we'll move on. So that really helped us in HB 1020. And then making sure that we carried those people through, even during the court fight, we kept checking in with the coalition. You might not understand what's going on right now. You might not be particularly interested in what's happening right now because it's just people filing motions back and forth. But here's what this part means. We filed this motion. Here's a one-pager on what we filed and what we're arguing, right? A lot of times we forget that people don't have access to PACER or can't read 23 pages of citations, right? And so making sure you're keeping community with you the whole time, because after the court case, you're going to have to do more advocacy.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's brilliant, and it is often a challenging step to remove self and acknowledge that someone else is better suited to help develop something, but it yields a much better result. And I know we are barreling towards the close of this program, but I have two more questions. One, Rubina, I'm going to kick over to you. You mentioned a lot of partners that you collaborated with. How, give us an example of what factors did you leverage in identifying those potential community partners, government entities, or those private sector stakeholders?
Um, well, actually, originally, they were naturally growing. It was a naturally growing collaboration. So the original sort of collaborators was definitely, like I said, Keela Crane, her great leadership at the state, and she reached out to the legal aid associations as well as the employer that had reached out to them, and said, we weren't actually planning as many events. We were planning like a couple, let's do a couple of these. But it got built along the way, because as more people, uh, actually, as more of us worked on the issue and worked with people, we said, oh, there's more going on here. Let's ask somebody else and see if they're willing to work with us. And then, and when they signed on, they're like, oh, there's something else we can do here. So we collaboration grew partly because the needs we were seeing in the community were much bigger than we realized initially. I mean, we had an idea there was a lot of things going on, but we definitely knew there was a bigger need, and the people who really believed in the mission wanted to do more and also gave us feedback to grow the program.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Rubina. LaRon, I'm coming to you for the last question. What is your ultimate wish list for community collaborators? What is the one thing that you would leave or tell people who are not legally inclined that want to join in and assist?
I would say that it's kind of a hard question, because I think it changes depending on the issue, depending on the community member, depending on the community organization. But being willing to both state what it is you really want or need, getting clear and being willing to have the communications with your constituents about where you want to go, and being willing to, we're a bigger organization. And so I think sometimes people feel a little hesitant to come to us, but being willing to engage and have a conversation. I think the other part is I would want community members to know that we are here for them, that we really want to support our most marginalized communities in being able to thrive. And so them seeing us as a place where they can engage.
LaRon, thank you so much for such an amazing answer. Rubina, Harriet, thank you all so much. You have been outstanding and given us so much information, certainly given us some areas where we can lean in. What I loved about this is that all of three of these agencies of programming, they're different, but it meets people where they are. They're in different geographical locations. So this type of collaboration can be replicated anywhere. Thank you so much for our attendees for joining this free session. We'd like to express our gratitude to this esteemed group of panelists. You all are doing such important work, and we thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to share your experiences with us today. The section of Civil Rights and Social Justice provides free webinars and resources to legal professionals and advocates nationwide. We hope this helps you in your work. Again, if you can, please consider joining or becoming active in the ABA. You may do so at americanbar.org/CRSJ. We will have additional resources that will be uploaded for you. And please don't go anywhere. We hope that you will stay with us for our next panel, Effectively Using Publicity to Help Your Case. It is sure to be an amazing panel as well, which will start at 1:30 p.m. Eastern and is accessible from the event live.